Welcome to Part B of Module 4. When consultants talk about measurement, reporting, and verification, they often jump straight to software. But software is not the system. Software only automates parts of a system. The system itself is the end-to-end backbone. It includes rules, data flows, and human decisions. These stretch from an initial requirement to a final management response. Today we will walk that backbone step by step. The first component is the requirement and decision. A requirement is the compliance or voluntary rule that triggers the need for measurement. The decision is the choice to act on that requirement. This produces a formal mandate and a monitoring plan. The program sponsor owns it. Next is the boundary. A boundary defines the spatial, temporal, and operational limits of what will be measured. It determines what is inside the system and what is excluded. The project proponent owns the boundary. Following the boundary is the results chain. A results chain is the logical sequence showing how an activity leads to an intended outcome. For example, it shows how distributing efficient cookstoves leads to reduced fuel consumption and lower emissions. It produces a causal model that justifies the intervention. The methodology developer owns the results chain. From the results chain, we derive the indicator. An indicator is the specific, measurable metric used to track progress along the results chain. It produces a quantifiable parameter. The monitoring plan author owns the indicator. Once indicators are set, we move to the data source. A data source is the origin point of the raw information. This could be an electricity meter, a satellite image, or a fuel purchase receipt. It produces raw data inputs. The facility operator owns the data source. Consider the verified example of metered cookstove monitoring under the gold standard. In an estimated approach, an indicator might rely on household surveys. These surveys guess how often a stove is used. In a metered approach, sensors on the stoves record actual usage. Emission reductions are then computed from measured cooking events. This mechanic shifts the indicator from an estimate to a direct measurement. This is the clearest real illustration of the difference between an estimated and a metered indicator. It shows how changing the data source changes the quality of the results. The system becomes more accurate when you measure actual events instead of guessing them. The data source moves from a paper survey to a digital sensor. This change improves the audit trail and makes verification much easier for the independent reviewer. Collection follows the data source. Collection is the process of extracting and transporting the raw data from the source to the processing environment. It produces a raw dataset. The monitoring technician or the automated data pipeline owns collection. Next is validation. In the context of the data pipeline, validation is the process of checking incoming data against predefined rules. This ensures the data is complete, plausible, and correctly formatted. It produces a flagged dataset, separating valid data from anomalies. The data manager owns validation. Validation catches mistakes early. It stops bad data from moving forward in the system. If a meter reports a negative energy use, validation flags it before anyone calculates emissions. This step saves time and prevents major errors later in the reporting cycle. Calculation is the application of formulas and equations to the validated data. This derives the final metrics, such as tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. It produces the computed results. The carbon accountant or the MRV analyst owns calculation. Before results are finalized, they undergo quality assurance and quality control, known as QA and QC. Quality control is the routine technical checking of data and calculations. Quality assurance is the broader systemic process of ensuring the QC system itself is working. This component produces an audited dataset and an error log. The quality manager owns QA and QC. These checks build trust in the numbers before they leave the organization. They ensure the math is right and the process is sound. Approval is the internal sign-off that the calculated and checked results are ready for external reporting. It produces an authorized dataset. Senior management, or the designated operational entity, owns approval. Aggregation follows approval. Aggregation is the process of summing individual data points into higher-level totals. For example, it rolls up project-level emissions to a national inventory or corporate total. It produces summary statistics. The reporting entity owns aggregation. Aggregation turns many small numbers into one big picture, but errors in aggregation can hide the true performance of individual projects. You must check the math at every level. Approval and aggregation prepare the data for the outside world. They make sure the final numbers are correct and officially accepted by the organization. The aggregated data then moves to the report. A report is the structured document that presents the data, methods, and results to an external audience. It produces a formal disclosure. The lead author or the compliance officer owns the report. A verified example of this is the Biennial Transparency Report Cycle under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change Enhanced Transparency Framework. Parties to the Paris Agreement submit these reports every 2 years. The first was due by the end of 2024. A biennial transparency report covers the National Inventory Report. It also covers progress towards the nationally determined contribution, policies and measures, climate change impacts and adaptation, support provided and capacity building needs. This is a real reporting arrangement a consultant can be asked to support. Once a report is submitted, it undergoes verification or review. Verification is the independent third-party assessment of the reported data against the established standard. Review is the technical assessment by a governing body. It produces a verification statement or a technical review report. An accredited independent verifier owns verification, while the governing secretariat owns review. As of July 2026, 37 countries had presented their first biennial transparency reports. They presented them at the third session of the Facilitative Multilateral Consideration of Progress. This event was held during the 64th session of the subsidiary bodies in Bonn. Finally, we reach the management response. This is the action taken by the reporting entity in light of the findings. It produces corrective actions and system updates. The executive board owns the management response. This step closes the loop and improves the next cycle. Digital MRV, or dMRV, replaces manual steps with technology. It combines satellite imagery, artificial intelligence, Internet of Things sensors, and distributed ledger records. This collects, processes, and verifies data with far less manual handling. The digital workflow runs in 6 steps. These are data capture, standardization, quality control, calculation, independent verification, and registry issuance. There is no manual re-entry between steps. It maintains continuous audit logs, so verifiers review structured data rather than reconstructing scattered records. The World Bank's Carbon Markets Infrastructure Working Group produced a technical guidance note on standardizing digital MRV. This note includes evaluation criteria for assessing system performance and identifying where digitization adds value. This note is your reference for what good looks like in a digital system. It helps you judge if a digital tool truly improves the MRV process. However, consultants must remember that technology categories have documented failure modes. Sensors suffer from drift and calibration loss. Optical remote sensing is limited by cloud cover and resolution constraints. Automated data pipelines can experience silent failures, where data stops flowing without triggering an alert. Furthermore, an immutable ledger entry of a wrong number is still wrong. Digital tools do not eliminate the need for the human-owned components of the system, such as boundary setting and management response. You still need people to define the boundary and respond to findings. Technology only speeds up the data handling. It does not replace human judgment or accountability. You must always check the digital system for these common engineering failures. Another verified example of a rulebook change is the Article 6.4 Paris Agreement crediting mechanism. Existing projects transition to the Article 6.4 methodology for all vintages from 2026 onwards. An interim registry launched in early 2026. This transition means the requirement, boundary, and calculation components of existing projects must be reevaluated against the new rules. The first methodology under this mechanism entered into force on adoption on 30 October. It is valid for 5 years unless revised or withdrawn. It is the first methodology to set out how baseline alignment with the Paris Agreement works in practice. With it, the UN carbon market is described as fully operational. This shows how a new rulebook forces consultants to rebuild their MRV systems from the ground up. For your chosen project or compliance scenario, produce a single-page MRV backbone map. This artifact must list each of the 14 components, from requirement to management response. For each component, state exactly what it produces. Also name the specific role or organization that owns it. This map will help you see the whole system on one page. It will show you where responsibilities lie and where data flows. Building this map is the best way to understand the true structure of an MRV system. You will see how a simple requirement turns into a verified report. You will also see how the management response links back to the start. This single page becomes your guide for designing and checking any climate reporting system you work on.